And we go live in 3, 2, 1. Is that a Suns shirt?
Oh, you know it is. So this is the new Sun shirt my wife gave me, repping the Valley. We played great, and we end up sweeping the Denver Nuggets 4-0. So get out the brooms. It's a sweep. And we are going to the conference finals for the first time since 2010. So I'll say that again, 2010. It doesn't seem like it's been that long ago, but it has been 11 years since 2010.
Wow.
So it feels great. So I am proud of the Suns. I keep lacking faith. I'm going to be honest. I keep saying that it should be a tough matchup, and then we end up doing really well. So, I'm not going to be a doubter anymore. I'm proud of this team. I think we're doing really well. Basically right now, for you, Cody, since I know you have no idea what's going on.
I have no idea.
We are waiting to see who wins the Jazz versus Clippers. So the winner of those two teams will play us, and then the winner of that game will go to the finals. So that would be amazing if the Suns made it to the finals. I think both of those teams are really tough, so it'd be tough to get past them. But I wouldn't put it past us. Just gonna say,
nice.
I think we got a shot, however slim a shot, to get there. So I'm pumped, and it's been a great week. Watching the games and everything. So, and your Hawks aren't doing bad. They're staying in their series as well. So kudos to them.
That's
for
what I
doing
heard.
well.
I need to get into it. I mean, that's what everybody keeps talking about. It's like, dude, the Hawks are in. The Hawks are in. I'm like, I didn't even know who the Hawks were for a little while. So I don't know. I might have to go get a shirt too. So I might get a Hawks shirt.
Be a bandwagon
how cool
fan
to be
for the Hawks.
if they played for the championship, the Suns be the Hawks.
I'm just gonna say it's unlikely that both teams make it. But stranger things have happened.
But you're saying there's a chance.
Somehow that there may be a chance. Very unlikely, but maybe a chance.
We'll do the first Will and Cody live, and we'll watch that game together.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though I have no idea what's going on.
I was going to ask, can you name one starting player for the Atlanta Hawks? Okay, so you are a true Hawks bandwagon fan that they have officially made it to the playoffs, and you're already bandwagoning. I did
the same thing with Atlanta United and the Falcons. So
you just wait for them to be good, and then you decide to jump on. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Whereas I've suffered through 10 years of misery with being a Suns fan, and so I finally get to rejoice. Spending most of my life just waiting, for the Suns to be good. So it's finally paying off. Finally is. So yeah. So great update there. Happy to give that update. That the Suns are doing well.
Well, maybe you'll keep wearing Sun shirts till the end. If not, if we don't see a Sun shirt, we know what happened. So I won't ask.
I'll be depressed. if we you notice the podcast takes a month break, you know what happened.
William's out.
Yeah, William's not recording.
Oh man. Dude, we actually got some questions this week, so I'm going to go ahead and read the first one. This one actually caught me off guard for a second, and it put a lot of thought into it, and I know we've already discussed it, but the question is, are there any areas regarding personal finance that the two of you do not agree about or don't necessarily see eye to eye on?
So that's a good question. And unfortunately, there's not a lot. Cody and we try to be of one mind when we're doing this podcast and things. We want to have differing opinions so that, you listening or watching can get different perspectives. But we find that we usually just tend to agree. And if there's something we disagree on, it's very slight. It's a very small disagreeing to the point where it's difficult bringing it up. And so I would joke and say it just means that we're right. And so it's like one of us isn't wrong, so we're not going to disagree. Of course, I'm joking with that. But there's just not a lot of things that we disagree on. And I would say that as we've done this, either the podcast or the content we're creating on social media or the blog, as we've talked with each other, our viewpoints have kind of like, we've convinced each other of different things. So as we stand now, we don't really disagree with each other on a lot of big topics, just because I think one of us has like won the other one over to their viewpoint. Or at least we've kind of found some common ground. There's really not like a big topic that we disagree on, I think.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. I mean, and we were both trained by the same financial advisor. We did the same internship. We've got the same people in our lives that are influential in what we've learned, what we do. So we have very similar viewpoints. But I mean, when we first started this, there was some times when I was like, oh yeah, this is how it goes. And you're like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think one was, and I think it's actually on the podcast, where I said that everybody needs a financial advisor. And then you said like you didn't quite think that was necessary, like not everybody. And I had a preconceived idea that everybody needed it. And I didn't know that there were limits to getting a financial advisor, that you needed to hit a certain kind of net worth for the most of them, the bulk of them.
Yeah.
And so I had no idea. And so for some people like that, if you can get to, let's say the amount is $100,000, or I think you said 250. If you can get to a net worth of 250, you're doing pretty good. So you probably don't even need one. But of course, I'm sure that there's people out there that have a very high net worth. They would rather just not worry about it. And then, financial would be nice. So my opinion of that everybody needs a financial advisor was completely changed.
Yeah. And I'd say to do that, to that point, I think it depends on the person's complexity, like the complexity of your personal finances. If you're managing different businesses, you've got your, maybe stock investments, real estate investments, different things that you're managing. And sometimes just even the cash flow part of it, just making sure that, you're selling at the right time or buying at the right time. It can be difficult to manage. Just making sure that you have a steady flow from your investments to feed like your lifestyle if you're living off of that. So maybe that's, something, or if you're, someone who needs a lot of advice, or with just like somebody to talk to, just having a person to go to that you can ask questions or that could help you along your journey. That could definitely be something. I just, don't want to say it's for everybody across the board that needs to have one. I think it can depend on your situation. And a lot of the simple stuff that we teach is really great for people that are under those minimums that would be at a financial advisor. Because I think, the stuff that we're trying to teach can get you up to that kind of net worth. And then you can decide from there if you want, to expand further, or if you just want to keep doing what you've been doing, if it's been working. So I think there's definitely a benefit to financial advisors. I think it just depends on your situation. And so I have financial advisor friends, and they're probably very upset with me right now for saying that, because they would say, of course you need a financial advisor. But I just think if I'm being honest and really looking at it, I think it depends on your situation. I don't think it should be the same across the board. But they can definitely helpful. They can definitely be helpful. I just don't think, we should just make it as a thing of like, that's for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that my mind was kind of changed when we went and talked about that after the podcast. Because, you're right. If you get up to that kind of net worth, like you could just continue doing what you're doing because it's already been working for you. And so, but there are people out there that have higher net worths, maybe really complicated, securities or things that it would be better that an advisor look at or handle. So, definitely there's a place for them, but the idea that everybody needs one is not really my opinion anymore.
Yeah. And I think it depends too, like also, another similar area that I would compare it to is like taxes. I think pretty basic, most people can do their own taxes, just pretty basic level. But as you add complexity, getting a CPA would, be of benefit. And I think planning those, planning out taxes, especially people with multiple businesses or multiple income streams and investments, that could be something that could be of benefit. But I wouldn't say across the board, everybody needs a CPA because I don't have one. I just do my own taxes, So I think it depends on that. There'd be something I kind of compare it to with that. And I think another thing I just thought of, Cody, that I think we also kind of came to see eye to eye on is like, using, mutual funds versus index funds. That's one thing I think we have like started to come to see more eye to eye just based off fees. I think that's really been something we've discussed a lot over the past few months is, yes, you can get a certain return, but what you have to look at what fees you're paying. And so I think that's something that we maybe disagreed of like, well, just look at the return. But looking at as well of like, okay, but what are the fees being charged by whatever you're investing in? So that would be something else I'd mention. That I think we've disagreed on. And then you've also helped me, when it comes to crypto, I'm really not an expert on that and really wasn't interested in that, to be honest. As an investment, I kind of was just like, it's going to take some time to research it, so I'm not really going to look into it. And was really just kind of like, I'm not sure how serious to take it. And so you've kind of, just helped educate me on that. That there could be some value there in certain ones. Some of them get kind of pumped up that maybe shouldn't be. But there is some value to be found, with them. So I would say, that's something that you've kind of helped me with. And so I think we have a balanced viewpoint on that. I don't think one of us is like more extreme or anything. So I think we've kind of come to a common understanding of that topic as well.
Yeah,
where we kind of used to be a little different, and we've kind of come together to agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, so we've disagreed, but it's not really the big topics, not like, emergency funds, like should you have one, is some debt okay? Like things like that, we're pretty much on the same page.
Yeah.
But yeah, some small things like that, fees in mutual funds versus index funds. Really, it's more about just the education. I like to lean towards more the finding savings, and you kind of help educate me more on things like investing and stuff like that. I try to focus on like ways to save money, maybe side hustles, things like that. So it's really more of just a lack of knowledge in that certain area. So like for me, mutual funds, like I didn't even really think that index funds really were a thing. I thought everything was mutual fund. For some reason, the idea of an index fund, like even when we were in our internship, we looked at mutual funds. This is a pretty common thing for that specific financial advisor. So I thought that's what everything was. And then
you thought everything was like actively managed. And then, there's the whole side of not actively managed funds and, what we call index funds. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2 or 3 years ago, if you said, hey, would you invest in an ETF? I would have told you no, go take a hike. But now I'm actually in some ETFs. So
yeah, you're like, oh, okay. Not that bad.
Yeah. I was like, no, they're not managing that, but
Oh, yeah. Well. I think knowledge, does help. And I think you educate me as well on things. So I think as we educate each other, I think it helps shape your viewpoint, hopefully, as you get some more information around it, versus like a preconceived notion that you're coming into some. So, sorry if that's disappointing, the person that asked the question, that we don't disagree. So here's our promise to you. If we find something that we like really disagree on, we will make sure to film our discussion of it. And maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a separate thing. But if we ever find something, we will make sure to record our discussion so you can have all the heated moments of me and Cody going back and forth. If that's what you were looking for, of me and Cody and I, just debating something maybe. I don't know if it's a debate, but we will make sure to cover that in some sort of recorded content if we find something. So that's our promise to you. And unfortunately, we're kind of boring right now and just agreeing with each other. So
So when I got that, I was like, oh, this is going to be really, really good. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know what it is. So
I don't know what we disagree on.
We even right before the podcast, we even like popped up top 10, like most controversial financial topics. And we went through them and we were like, William's like, well, what about this? I'm like, oh, I think this. He's like, darn it. Me too. So
we were like trying to find things we disagree on. We promise we tried. So,
but all right, we also had another question. This one's a really good one. How do I figure out exactly how much I should have in an emergency account? And should I always keep adding to it?
Good question. Thank you for asking. Appreciate that. to keep it simple, our recommendation, and Cody, let me know if you disagree about any of this. We would say 3 to 6 months of expenses. So what we would do is, as you're budgeting, you're getting an idea of what your regular expenses are. And some people would do a trim down like essentials expenses. And some people would just say, okay, how much do I spend? So again, not earn. Some people could go off of income. We just look at it in terms of expenses, just making sure those expenses are covered for how much you're spending each month, and then saving up into 3 to 6 months. Now, the difference between 3 to 6 months, that would be up to you. And usually the things you're determining for that is, stability of the income stream. So if you have one job and you're really not confident with it, that things could happen, you could be let go, versus some job you're like, I don't see it being an issue of being let go. That could affect that 3 to 6 months. So if you're worried about it, then you should probably err on the side of 6 months. But if you're not really worried about it, then you can go 3. Other things are, if you have multiple income streams in your household, so maybe you have maybe a side hustle and your main job, or let's say your spouse works as well, then that could, decrease your, how much you would need to save, maybe closer to 3 months. So that's where that kind of varies. And we give that kind of window to say 3 to 6 months, you should be good within that window of time. And so if you're a person that's really worried about it, and maybe you just want to make sure it's covered, then just go, if you want to go 6 months of expenses, you can do that. If you're somebody that's like, man, I rarely have emergencies, then I would, then you could just do 3 months. So it's really up to you and your preference. But we would just say within that window, that would be, you'd be pretty safe within that window. Cody, any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. Usually when you want to get to the 6 months is like what William said, if you have one income stream and you're just not so sure about it. An example would be like something that's mostly based off of commission. Mm-hmm. And so you could have a bad season, even something like you own your own business or something like that. Let's just say you have a bad season, or it's not the busy season or something like that. You could have some times where it's like, you know what, I need to have some reserves, some extra reserves. And so I would definitely say go to that 6 months. I like being better safe than sorry. So I personally am 5 months and then 6 months if, we just did essentials. So if I cut out like, Netflix and a couple, out-eats and stuff like that, I could do it for 6 months. That was just kind of peace of mind. But we have 2 income streams, so we really don't need to. We could have done 3 months, but I just like going overkill. So anything over 6 months, though, I'm going to be honest with you, is overkill. And I've heard of people saying, hey, I want to do a year. I even heard of a whole year of earnings. Yeah,
I've heard of this.
And that's a lot. That's going to take a lot of time. And I feel like maybe you should be, investing that or putting that towards other goals. But if that's what makes you happy, of course, we're not going to, tell you otherwise, go do what makes you happy. But I do believe that's a little bit overkill. There was a second part of that question that says, and should I keep adding to it, or should I always keep adding to it? And the answer is no, unless there's a change in your life when it comes to your expenses, or change in job when it comes to the security of your job. So for example, if you had a very secure job and you were okay with 3 months, and then let's say you decided to have a different job and it was commission based, we need to probably put that up towards 6 months, right? And then we need to look at, you need to always be thinking of life changes. So for example, if you get married, then you have another person that is depending maybe on your income. If that's the case, you should probably increase, because those expenses are going to go up. That's, more food. That's probably higher insurance, more utilities being used, possibly another car. So we got to look at that. If you have a kid, it's even more. Even if you bring in a dog, we adopted a dog, and he cost more than I thought. And I was
Dogs are
like, well,
expensive.
my expenses went up.
Yeah.
And so my emergency fund was supposed to go up by like $100. And I was like, oh, that's not that big a deal, but it's still something to look at. So should you always be doing it? Should that be part of the budget, even though you've got that fully funded emergency fund? Should you have still a percentage that's just going to it? I would say no. It's not really necessary. I have heard of people that said you should have a small percentage for inflation. But honestly, I think you should just be looking at what your expenses are. And as your expenses may inflate themselves, then you should adjust and up the emergency fund. So, take every other month or so, just take a look at the expenses. If anything's changed and you see, oh, I've got, a couple $100 more than I thought, do the math, multiply it by 3 or 6 or whatever you're doing, and then just make that adjustment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you need to keep adding to it regularly. Just from what Cody said, you kind of just have an amount that you want to set aside. And then over that, you want to make sure your money's working the most for you as possible. So you wouldn't necessarily want to just keep setting it aside unless it's just really good peace of mind for you. And that's important. Because the other thing that I would say is as we've talked about margin, so that extra money that you have, between your income and expenses. And so as you're funneling that to your emergency fund, once you hit that number, then you can channel that money towards something else. And you would only bring it back in the case of, first, if, you spent something out of your emergency fund, then you'd obviously replenish it back up to your number. Or what Cody was saying, where if your expenses have changed, then you want to make sure you're bumping that up as well. So that's the thing I would say, mostly consider, if you're using it, replenish it, and then get back to where, what you were, pushing your money towards before. But then also I'd say keep an eye on your expenses, because big life events like that can, or moving, changing jobs, getting married, having kids, things like that, can definitely increase those expenses. And you want to make sure your emergency fund is matching those as it goes along. But I wouldn't say you need to, keep adding to your emergency fund every month. My wife and I haven't. Once we got to our number, we let it sit, and then we just move on to the next thing. And so if we ever use that, we'll build it back up. Or if we reevaluate and think our expenses are higher, then we can definitely up that emergency fund, amount. So really, there's a lot of flexibility with this. As you think, 3 to 6 months, there's a wide window. So really, it's just what's comfortable for you and what gives you peace of mind, knowing that you're going to be, you're going to be fine, even if you lost your job or had, some emergency come up. So definitely some flexibility with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, consider, because I think I have heard people that just keep adding, to their emergency fund. And I would say, if you want to be safe, sure, you can do that, but I don't think it's necessary. I think you can set your amount, your goal that you're looking for, and then once you meet it, you can move that money, your monthly, margin somewhere else. They maybe could have a higher return. But yeah, it's a good question. Good thought. With that.
Very good.
I did have somebody ask me a question. It wasn't submitted, but just asking me, in the crazy world that we live in, they were asking, is now a good time to buy a house? And so I thought that'd be something. I know it's a difficult topic to cover, a lot of thoughts on it right now, in the craziness of it. But I thought that's something that we could talk about and kind of share our thoughts, at least our personal perspective on what we think about buying a house currently, with what the housing market looks like. So what do you think, Cody?
That's a great question. So one, I'm not a housing expert, so I just want that to be clear. And the housing market's very different from, like the stock market or other markets. It's similar, but it's different. It's not the same idea. It's a little localized. So for right now, I live in Georgia, north parts of Georgia, and there's a lot of people moving from California and New York for whatever reason. I don't know what that reason is, coming down here to Georgia. And they tend to have had a lot higher income than what is here in Georgia. And so they're able to afford a lot more. And so a lot of people that are selling their houses are asking pretty large amounts of money, and the asking prices are, or the buyout is usually about $30,000 to $40,000 more than the asking price.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's very difficult to compete with somebody that's here making what, a person that lives in Georgia makes versus somebody that's outside of state. Now that's a localized thing. Now the nation as a whole is definitely going into a increase in the housing market, but it is localized. So it's going to be different at where you're at. So there's certain counties in Georgia that it's about the same. And then there's certain counties in Georgia that it's absolutely insane. So, there's a lot of variability to this, but as far as the question of should you buy a house, the answer is going to always be yes, if you can afford it. Owning a house tends to be cheaper than renting. And if you buy something now, 30 years from now, it'll probably appreciate in value. So there's nothing wrong with buying a house. I personally will probably not buy a house anytime soon unless just an amazing deal comes up, just because I know people are paying a lot of money more than what they used to be worth about a year or two ago. I mean, we're talking $50,000 to $100,000 more than what they were about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And to me, that makes me think, okay, well, maybe that's not appreciation of value. Maybe that is just a high demand, and that should change. When you look at things like lumber prices, there was a high demand for it and there was a very low supply. So the cost of lumber went up drastically. That kind of thing is happening with houses. In fact, new houses are not being built because of that lumber shortage and other high material costs. And so houses that already exist, their value went up a good bit. So I personally think that this is not going to last forever. It might. That's just my personal opinion. But one thing my boy Warren Buffett said was be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And right now, at least in my area, there's a lot of greedy people paying a lot of money for not very much house. And so that makes me a little leery. And so just taking that kind of wisdom that applies to, the stock market or applies to other markets, I'm going to apply that to the housing market as well.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And again, I'm not a housing market expert, but I do understand how markets in general work. And so I think you said it right, at least from what I have looked into and investigated. If you go back to simple economics, you've got your supply and demand and how it affects your price of the good, or in this case, a house. So you have a large shortage in supply. And then I think also coming out of COVID, a lot of people were stuck indoors. So who wouldn't want to change the scenery? I know I did. My wife and I moved, shortly after COVID. We just needed more space in general. We'd been planning on it. But I think a lot of people were like, it was that extra incentive to want, to get a house, being stuck inside a lot with COVID happening. So I think that also could have impacted your demand. I think there's a higher demand for it. And then in a lot of regions, as you mentioned, Cody, with some people doing remote work, they're like, well, why wouldn't we move to a lower cost of living area? We can get more house for less or for the same amount that we would, back where we're from, like California or New York. So I think that could definitely also be a factor, in prices as well. But when you look at things like that, you have to evaluate, is this a long-term shift in supply and demand, or is it a short-term shift in supply and demand? And so from what I've seen, especially on the building side, it appears to be a short-term change in supply and a short-term change in demand. So if you look at that, you would expect that those would then adjust back over time, or at least level out over time. So I would expect houses are probably going to be built in the future. I don't know when, but you would think that the supply of houses would get back up to speed. Therefore, the price of, all houses should, go down, as the demand is being met. Now, I do not attempt to know the timing of when this takes place, and I don't think anyone can ever perfectly time a market. But I do recognize patterns in the market. And so I do recognize, as you mentioned, Cody, what seems like people being very aggressive, and they seem to be overpaying for what the quality for the same house, the same quality you were getting a year ago. Nothing changed with the house itself. It's only people's perception of the house and what value they think they're getting along with it. And so I think that's what would make me, worried. But I would also agree, with your sentiment that really it's, do you need it and can you afford it? Now, I know a lot of times we say I need stuff. Check out my blog post that I made a while back about what a want versus a need is. So I think if you actually need a place to live, like you can't, for some reason, can't rent where you're at and you have to buy a house and you can't afford it, okay, you don't have to always time the market perfectly. But if you're somebody who's saying, I kind of wish I could buy a house, I've kind of been thinking about it off and on, maybe it would be a pause to wait. It was the only thing I would say for that. Because this could be a really good opportunity when everyone else is buying at extreme highs just to get in and say that they got a house. It could be a great time for you to prep and start saving money and getting things ready for if supply catches up and if demand kind of cools off, then the prices should level off. Now, I'm not somebody, who's going to be able to call what they say, a bubble or, that there's going to be some big collapse. But I do believe that there's going to be some sort of adjustment over time, where houses will, kind of become cheaper or at least closer to what they were before. And that would be a great time if you're prepared, to be able to go take advantage and buy. I think a lot of times we just get into a frenzy, and it's kind of what it's looking like, unfortunately, where it's kind of a herd mentality of, oh, everybody's going and buying a house and the price is going up, so I better buy now. And it's like, well, it doesn't make really logical sense. Just because everyone else is buying a house and just because you think prices, may go up, it's still like, what are you buying? You're paying money for something. What are you getting in return? So that's the only thing that I would look at as well, is the value that you're getting. If I was going to, into a store to buy my favorite cereal, and I noticed that it was like, almost double in the price that it was before, I wouldn't necessarily be excited to pay that, right? Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, yes, sweet, it's double what it was before. Like, I would be like, oh, shoot, well, I guess I'll get a different cereal, or I'll wait on cereal. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'll wait for the discount, So I think, I never, you never know exactly how the housing market's going to work, but it seems like everybody's freaking out that it's double the price. And it's like, I don't, it's not double in every area, but, so I think it's a great Warren Buffett quote. Don't just be greedy just because everyone else is greedy. That's usually the time to be fearful, because other people are probably overvaluing what they're paying, what they're getting. Especially, a lot of people paying, it seems like they're just going to extremes just to buy a house. And I don't think that's necessary. I think there's a lot of virtues in renting. Now, I know renting will depend on your region and availability as far as the pricing goes with that. But I still think renting is a great solution, because you're not really committed to this big debt that you're taking on, or this long-term agreement. It could be a really good, just like, all right, we'll wait it out, see how things go. And it's a great way just to, like, you're paying for somewhere to live. Can't really go wrong with that, of paying a reasonable amount to live safely with your family, or, if you're, living on your own. I don't think it's a bad alternative versus saying that you have to buy a house. I don't think you have to, unless that's your specific case.
Then we're like right about a time, but I did want to add something else is those that have a house, I'm sure you've had a real estate agent reach out to you and say, hey, you should sell your house. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of people I know that have made a lot of money selling their house right now, even though that was not even on their plan, but they saw the offer, before it was even on the market. And they were like, whoa, this is awesome. But I also know some people that did that and could not find another house to live in.
That's the thing. You got to know where you're going to live.
Yeah.
You got to live somewhere. So.
This one thing to think about is like, it's a great opportunity to make some money, but you might be forcing yourself to rent or to buy something more than you thought. And, for whatever reason, I'm sure there's a lot of people, I know a lot of people that are making a lot of money. And I know somebody that actually sold and is renting, and it worked out really well for them. But outweigh those pros and cons. Really think about it. It is a seller's market. So if you do have property to sell, go for it. But, if it's just your house or just your home, I would really think twice before just looking at that number, because if that number is high for you, it's going to be high probably, next door in whatever neighborhood that you're going to try to find a house in. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I think it is a great opportunity to sell, but you got to live somewhere. So make sure you've got alternatives, could figure out. Because if it's, if you're getting a lot, it's going to be a lot to buy somewhere else. That's a great point, Cody.
Yeah. Well, man, we're right at time. So we appreciate those questions. They were really, really good.
Thank you.
We love getting those. So if you guys have more, please send them our way. www.willandcody.com. Just go to the contact us page, submit your question there. We'll answer it on the podcast. But anyway, guys, we really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.